What's up, guys? Murphy Firearms Training here. Got some MagTech brass shot shells, and wanted to show you guys how to load these. Start with what you need. Obviously, you need brass hulls. You're going to need some components, lots of components actually. You're going to need a cushion wad. You're going to need a nitro card. And you're going to need an overshot card. And if you've ever loaded, or if you've seen my video on loading a muzzle loading shotgun, these are the same things you need for a muzzle loading shotgun. Okay. You're also going to need black powder. Okay, so Go X2F if you're loading for a shotgun. You're going to need that. You're going to need some kind of lubricant. I use this mink oil. Crisco works. And last but not least, sorry, I got all my stuff sitting on the table behind me. You're going to need shot. This is 7.5 bird shot, but any old bird shot will do. So you're going to need all of that. Okay, that's all that's going into the shell. But you're also going to need some equipment. Now, I bought this very antique set on eBay, and they actually have several of them for sale. And it came with this guy here, which is a wad guide. This guy here, which is a depriming base, just a little piece of wood. You can make this yourself with a piece of wood. You just drill a hole where you need it. This guy here, which is a wad ram, and if you turn the handle around, is a deprimer, okay? And I don't take the handle off, and I'll show you why, but because I made my own. So that guy, and then the most important one, this guy, okay? This is your primer, okay? And this is the part that I don't think you could live without. I mean, I guess technically you could get a piece of wood and then get a dowel rod like this that's just, you know, a nice tight fit, and just tap it down over the primer. But this is an antique set that I use to help me load these. You're also going to need pistol primers. Okay, so these brass hulls do not take shotgun primers. They take large pistol primers. Okay, large pistol primers. So it's a lot of equipment. But what is this useful for? Well, let's say you buy an old Damascus shotgun with the twist style barrels where they used to beat the wire till it was a solid piece of metal around the mandrel. The only other thing you need, by the way, just as an aside, I'm like a dog chasing a squirrel, is you need some kind of glue to hold your overshot card in, and I'll get to that. But, anyway, so if you want to fire an old Damascus shotgun that was made to handle cartridges from the late 1800s to the early 1900s before smokeless powder, and you think it'd be dangerous to shoot current plastic hulls in it, this is your workaround, because black powder doesn't develop as much pressure. It's a different pressure curve. So, what I've got is this one here is already deprimed. Okay, so I'm going to sit him there. But I've got a few that have not been deprimed, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So, I take my depriming base, and normally what you would do is you'd sit this thing in here. So, I'll turn it for the camera. You'll sit it like that. It fits in here nicely. And the hole lines up with the primer. Okay, and you'd sit it here, and you take this guy's got a little pin in it, and you turn it over, and you line it up, and you'd hit it with your hand. Okay, so it looks something like that if you're working from the side. Okay, I actually took a 3/4 inch dowel rod. Okay, and a 3/4 inch dowel rod is a snug, let me show you, I mean snug fit on this hole. Snug fit. As a matter of fact, it has a slight taper at the bottom, and it's too snug, so I actually took a little wood off. And I drove a screw in here with some glue around the threads, and then I took it to the grinder till it's a nice, and so it lines up with the primer every time. Whereas this guy, if you look at it, it's kind of a loose fit, the antique one, and you miss the primer and you break the pin, and I didn't want to do that to an antique set. So I take this, and then this is a lot longer. You can see it's way longer. But I line that up like that, okay? And then I just give it a whack, okay? And I've got a little brass hammer here. And I give it a whack right and no primer. So if it'll focus, right, you'll see my little pin sticking out. There's your spent primer there on the bench. Pop that loose. That's been deprimed. And these primers come out, they've got some corrosion from the black powder. They're really not meant for black powder. Okay, so, and it's that easy. You just lay it in your little block. You put your rod with a pin. And like I said, I made this. This is homemade. Give it a good whack. Primer falls out, right? And deprimed, okay? So, and that's how you deprime them. That's step one, is to deprime them, okay? So I'm going to deprime them. I'm going to just do a set of 5. So I'm going to deprime a couple more, and then I'll move on to the next step. So these are boxes of 25, and normally I deprime the whole box, but y'all don't want to sit and watch me deprime 25 holes. So, okay, put it in, give it a whack, okay? Make sure your primer goes off. Look, I upset my camera. The lens didn't want to focus. Anyway, so we'll stop at those 4. That's fine. Those 4 is fine. So we got them deprimed, okay? Our next step is to reprime them, okay? So before I reprime these, this is your primer pocket cleaner from Lee, and there's other brands out there. Because black powder tends to leave a lot of fouling, I always clean the primer pockets on these. If you don't, you cannot seat the new primer, especially if you don't do it several times in a row. You'll get a whole lot of primers that just won't seat. So anyway, primer pocket cleaner. Okay, and there's other brands. That's the Lee, that's the big, that's the small. If it'll focus, that's the small, and that's the big. Just a little flat piece of metal. And again, if you're a DIY person, you can do it yourself. Now, this guy's the one tool you really would have trouble making. These others you can make. I mean, you can make a wad punch. You can make a primer, a deprimer out of a dowel. But this guy's a little hinged piece of cast metal. And it's got this little button to help seat your primer. So what you're going to do is drop your brass hull right there. Okay, so it sticks through just like that. Okay, and you're going to take your large pistol primers. And what I like to do with my pistol primers, if I'm going to do 4 or 5, is I'll just dump 4 or 5 out in my hand, and I'll lay them on the bench just so that I can just put them together. And I've heard lots of people say don't handle primers, but I've not had any issues with this. I've been doing it for a while. So take your primer and sit it here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and close this just so it won't fall out. I'm going to show you what I do. So this kind of hits at an angle. And so what I do is give it a little squeeze and then turn it 180 degrees and give it another little squeeze to get that primer flat. It tries to angle, and it may just be the one that I've got. I mean, this device is 100 years old, so who knows. But you give it a good firm squeeze, and I will tell you to make sure this is below flush, and you can feel that it's below flush. And you've got a primed brass hull. Okay, and you can tell these have been fired. They got some residue in them. I try to clean them up real good with laundry detergent and such. But drop the next one in, right? So drop it in. Put your primer in. Close that. And then, like I said, you'll see it's kind of angled. And I'll give it a little squeeze. Spin it 180 degrees. And give it another little squeeze. And you'll feel once it gets in there correctly, because it'll slide right in really easily. It's not nearly as difficult. It doesn't feel like you're forcing it. It does take a lot of hand pressure. I'm not going to lie. It takes a lot of hand pressure to seat these. Maybe I'm just wimpy, but you got to have a pretty good grip. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll get these in here. And like I say, just give it a little squeeze, spin it, give it a little squeeze, and you'll feel it kind of pop in there so that it's going straight. And it's pretty easy, okay? And we'll prime these hulls. And once you got them primed, then you're going to start stuffing components in. So if you own a muzzle-loading shotgun, or you've ever loaded a muzzle-loading shotgun, after you prime this, okay? So after you prime these, everything you do is identical to loading a muzzle loading shotgun. So before we get started loading these hulls, I got all my components laying here, and I just want to make sure you know, for loading black powder hulls and loading black powder shotguns, it's the same thing. You're going to do an equal amount of powder, 2F powder, and shot. So here's 2F powder, and here's 7.5 bird shot. And so if you are loading a 12 gauge, your standard, just run-of-the-mill load like you'd buy at Walmart is a 3 dram load, and we can load that. So I've got this antique measure, and I mean, it is antique. It's over 100 years old, and it's very, very faded and hard to read, but you'll see it says 2.5, 2 3/4, 3, 3 1/4, 3 1/2. And on this side, it says 1 ounce, 1 1/8, 1 1/4, 1 3/8, 1 1/2, okay? And the way this works is this top notch, this very top notch, is 2.5 drams of powder, 1 ounce of shot, okay? And if I go down and to the left 1 notch, it's the very next reading down, which is 2 3/4 dram and 1 1/8 ounce of shot, okay? And the next one would be 3 drams and 1 1/4 ounces of shot, etc. Okay, so I'm going to load. This is your El Cheapo Federal Winchester Walmart bottom shelf 100-pack stuff, which is 3 drams. Okay, and so that's, you know, starting at 2.5, 2 3/4. That's a 3 dram. Okay, 3 dram load. A very mild, not very hard kicking load. That's where I'm going to set my powder measure. Okay, that's where I'm going to set my powder measure. Now, they do sell a replica of this. They also sell this cheap lead dipper, okay? And I used this guy to calibrate this guy. And what I want to tell you is, if you take this little doodad, this lead dipper, which you can find everywhere, it's plastic and it's cheap, and you click it out 1 click, that is a 2.5 dram load. The next click is 2 3/4 dram. The next click is 3 drams. And I don't know if you can see it, but I actually engraved that on here because I'm really lazy. Okay. So this is a 3 dram load as well. And I could use it instead of digging up my antique measure. So it's just kind of fun. And I usually actually use this one to load my brass hulls. And I keep this in my bag to load my actual antique muzzle loader. But anyway, so we take our primed brass hull, we sit it here, and we put our wad guide over it. Okay, we put our wad guide over it. Now, before I go any further, I already showed you our different wads. There's our cushion wad. It's really thick. It's made out of fiber. There's our nitro card. It's very dense, very, very tough little card. And then our little tiny overshot card, which is very, very thin, like an index card. These are 11 gauge wads. And you say, wait a minute, I have a 12 gauge shotgun. I know that. But these are way thinner than a plastic hull. And so if you use 12 gauge wads, there's actually a gap, and all the powder will go around the wads and won't seal in the gun. So you have to use 11 gauge wads for this purpose. And then some people for the overshot will tell you to get an 11 gauge. Some will tell you to get a 10 gauge. These are 10 gauge wads, and they work really well. So I'm in the 10 gauge camp because that's what I bought. Okay. And we're going to load this just like a muzzle loader. So you take your 2F powder with this guy set to 3 drams. And basically you want a level scoop. Okay, so a level scoop. And you're going to take this and you're going to pour it into your brass hull. Okay, cool. Then what? Your nitro card. Okay, and then your wad guide. And you're gonna, and you want to seat that wad firmly. You don't want to beat on it, but you want it in there firm. Okay, so there's your nitro card. And they say to use this, but I find it's easier to just do it without it. So I have it, but anyway, cool. So we do that. Now, next is our cushion wad. And if you watch my video on loading a muzzle loading shotgun, you know you want to lube your cushion wad. This is especially important with a brass hull because you're putting an 11 gauge wad in a 12 gauge gun. So I just take this mink oil, and you can use Crisco, you can use whatever you want to use, okay? And you're going to put this guy right here. And you're just going to get him started. And you're going to shove him down. Okay? Nice and firm. I just kind of use my weight. Okay? Now, you want to, you see I got a little bit of that mink oil on here, this excess stuff. You want to wipe that off. You don't want that on the end of your hull. Okay? So you got your cushion wad. Now what this does, the nitro card seals your powder, so your powder can't get wet. And the cushion wad keeps your shot from deforming. Now I take my shot basket. And this is an old bullet container that I repurposed for shot to take to the range. And I'm going to get an equal scoop of birdshot. So the exact same setting that I had for the other guy. Okay, for the powder. Okay, so birdshot. Cool. Now what? Overshot card. And the easiest way to start an overshot card is to put it in at an angle. So I'll show you on the camera here. Kind of angle it. Okay. And then just take the wad guide and press it down. Now, if you bought a brass hull shotgun shell back years ago, they would continue to put these paper wad guides, these paper overshot cards, until you were right at the top, and then they would crimp the top so that it did this and held onto those cards. That ruins your brass hulls pretty quickly, and I don't have any equipment to do that with. So we're going to glue this in place, and I suggest rubber cement or water glass. Rubber cement's a little easier to find, but water glass is cheaper. So I bought a thing of water glass actually on Amazon, and it's called sodium silicate. And I got these little pipettes, and I just pipe it around, and I literally just put a big clear layer. I mean, I just pipe the hole. You can kind of see it running there around the edge, and I pipe that on there, and I set it off to the side, and I let it dry, and that's it. And it's magic. Now, the reason you have a gap there is this is a fairly light load. If you wanted a heavier load, then you would have more room. These are not long enough to handle. This scoop goes up to 5 drams. These are not long enough to handle a 5 dram load. They'll handle about a 3 3/4 dram load, 3.5 drams, somewhere in that neighborhood. Again, if you're shooting an antique shotgun, 3 drams is enough. I mean, that's your general bird shot. You don't need any more than that. And again, so I'll take, and what I like to do is I like to stage things. So like, these are all primed, and so I'll do powder in all 3. So I'll scoop the powder, right? Scoop the powder and pour, right? The big thing with doing this is making sure you don't accidentally, right? So scoop the powder and pour, and scoop the powder and pour. Be careful not to overcharge. The good thing is if you do a bunch of these, and the overshot card's all the way at the top, you know you've overcharged it because the other ones aren't. So, but anyway, so we'll do that. Then we do our nitro cards, and so I come in, put a nitro card in that one. Just put them here in the center where you can see them. And put a nitro card in that one. And put a nitro card in that one. And then take my wad guide, right? And just push good and firm. I want to seat these good and firm. Okay? 11 gauge nitro cards, or over powder cards, what some folks call them. Right? I have seen people do things weird ways. Okay, so me, I take my cushion wad and I just roll it in this mink oil or Crisco or whatever. Some folks, what they'll do is they'll actually take their finger and they'll just put a wad of solid lubricant. Let me get it how I want it here, and then I'll show the camera. They'll actually just put kind of all around, not outside, because they're a little neater at this than me, and push it down, and that'll lube. What you're trying to do is just put a little bit of lubricant. Some people actually, instead of lubricating these thick cushion wads, when they load them, they actually soak them in like vegetable oil. Okay, that's a little excessive for me. I don't really want to do that. okay? But the idea is just that there's going to be some powder fouling, and this helps keep it loosened up and kind of at a minimum. And it's the same when you're loading a black powder gun. You want your powder fouling kind of held at a minimum, okay? So we get that in there, and we give this a push, okay? And you see, I mean, these start fairly easily. They're not that hard to start, which is why I don't use this guy, okay? So your wad guide is that big silver thing, and your wad punch is the piece of wood. And like I said, a lot of people use a 3/4 inch dowel rod, but it doesn't have the cool handle. So, and it's not antique. And so I got this antique loading set to load for my antique side-by-side shotgun, and I can shoot my 12 gauge antique shotgun. Then what? Take this out of the powder and put it in the bird shot, right? And you see how you kind of have to have a spot on a kitchen table or a bench or something to do this, but it's not as bad as it seems. Full scoop, not rounded over, just full, and pour. I will say I will not load antique 20 gauges because all the scoops are designed for 10 and 12 gauges, and they fit so nicely. 20 gauge, you almost have to have a funnel or something to keep the shot and the powder and stuff from getting away, whereas with the 12 gauge, okay? Now, if you've seen my shotgun loading video where I load my muzzle loading shotgun, you know that I cheat. So I actually have an 11 gauge muzzle loading shotgun, and so I have this wonderful thing that I can load these with the same components that I use for my 11 gauge muzzle loader. And so I get to use dual purpose. And all of these wads come from Track of the Wolf, and they're made by Circle Fly Wads, which is a famous company for muzzle loading cushion wads and nitro cards, overshot cards, felt wads, revolver wads, I mean everything. And then the last thing is I take my water glass and my pipette, and I literally just pipe a layer of glue on top of this and let it dry, and it will dry to a kind of a crust, if you will. And I try not to put too much. I mean, you can be excessive, but just enough layer that this whole thing is covered, and voila. And then you got to have a safe place for these to sit and dry. And once they've dried, you get a brass 12 gauge hull, and they're ready to shoot. You can store these for as long as you want to, and they'll go bang. And so if you ever find a Damascus shotgun, and you can buy these, anybody that sells reloading stuff sells these MagTech brass shot shells. So if you ever find an old shotgun, and someone says, oh, you can't shoot it, you can't shoot it. And you look down the bore, and the bore is not pitted. It's not in terrible shape. You know, it's not rusty inside and out. If it's a good-looking shotgun, you absolutely can load a 2 3/4 or 3 dram 12 gauge and shoot it. And so they're a lot of fun, and it's a great way to get out and shoot an old gun. Now, one last thing, kind of a word of warning. Real black powder and black powder substitutes are hygroscopic, okay? That's a big fancy word. What does it mean? It means that they attract water. And specifically, I live in the Southeast, if you can't tell from the accent. And in the Southeast, we have a lot of water just in the air, and humidity. And what happens is if you shoot a black powder cartridge or gun or anything like that, and you do not clean it that day, it will attract a lot of water, and because the black powder fouling sticks to the bore, it will make that water stick to the bore. And that is why a lot of antique muzzle loading guns are rusted and pitted and nasty. And it's because someone went out and shot it, didn't clean it, and voila, rusted gun. So if you buy an antique shotgun and you do load these brass shot shells, you have absolutely, positively got to clean every square inch of that gun that day. You cannot put it away and say, I'll clean it in a few days, I'll clean it in a week. You have to clean it that day. If you don't, you will ruin a beautiful antique gun, okay? So it's amazing. Most people think if you shoot it, you'll ruin it. The truth is you can shoot it all you want to if you use the right ammo. You have to clean it. That's what's going to ruin it, is if you don't clean it, okay? And again, all you need, this priming tool is invaluable, but you can find them. There's a bunch of them out there. I mean, there's a bunch of folks who found these in attics selling them on eBay. If you have an antique powder measure, it's great. If not, this guy, the Lee Dipper, the Lee adjustable dipper, is pretty amazing. And the 3 dram setting is the one, let me see if I can get it to focus. The 1 1/4 ounce mark is the 3 dram setting. So on that. And then, like I said, this could just be a piece of wood with a hole drilled in it for getting your primer out. This could just be a dowel rod. Well, and my deprimer is a dowel rod. And I screwed a wood screw into it and then kind of sharpened it on the grinder so that it was centered and would hit the primer every time. You know, so anyway, I mean, those are the tools that you need if you want to shoot an old shotgun. And the brass hulls are about 25 bucks for a box of 25 anywhere you buy them. But they can be reloaded literally forever. There's so little pressure in these loads that these will last my lifetime and my kids. And so if you find an old Damascus shotgun, you find a shotgun with hammers, you know, rabbit ears, it's 100+ years old, and it says fine Damascus twist or fine London twist or fine twist barrels, it's going to be a Damascus gun. And you can still shoot it. It's a lot of fun to shoot. You just got to clean it when you're done. And the great thing is you don't actually need any reloading equipment. It's all stuff you can do at your dining room table with hand tools. So I hope it helps someone. If you have questions, shoot me a message, and I'll try my best to answer them. And if you want to see anything else, leave it in the comments or shoot me a message and let me know. Thanks, guys. Have a great evening.